When I was around 8 years old, we moved into a new house. It wasn't old, but it was a fairly new built house, either maybe built around the 60s. Everyone got their own room, and this was the first time I was on my own. I thought I was a big shot. A little background on myself. I would like to call myself somewhat sensitive. Ever since I was a child, I could always feel the sense of something or someone around when no one else could. Fast forward to when I was 9, it was the first year in the house. I could feel the presence of something in there, but I never really thought anything of it, considering it wasn't too negative. There were 3 rooms that I didn't really like being in, because the energy felt somewhat dark. The basement, the bathroom, and the attic. I didn't mind being in the basement when I had friends over, but when I was alone, I couldn't be in there for more than 5 minutes without getting the feeling like I was being watched. In the bathroom was a cabinet that was very deep. You could literally fit 2 grown men in there. I never understood why it was so big. But I didn't feel right, and I wouldn't often feel drawn to just look inside and stare for a few minutes, and I would get a very uneasy feeling. The attic, on the other hand, was a different story. I never ever opened it. I kept the door shut at all times. Something was up there and it didn't want company. One night, I was laying in bed. It was around 2:45 in the morning when I heard footsteps in the hallway. I assumed it was just one of my brothers coming home from a night out with friends. My bedroom door was open, so I looked to see if anyone was walking around. I stared for about what seemed like 10 minutes and no one went by. I got scared, so I decided to wait it out. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I thought I saw the shape of a human in the corner of my bedroom. I thought that it was just my eyes playing tricks on me, so I tried to turn over and go back to sleep, but I felt like I was being watched. Now, in a 9-year-old's mind, it's the boogeyman, so I quickly hopped out of my bed and tried to run into my mom's room. Her room was only 2 doors down from mine. In order to walk out of my room, you would have to pass a wall that was somewhat slanted. In order to do this, you would have to walk sideways. As I did this, I felt 2 hands pressed down on my shoulders. I froze in fear. I couldn't move, I couldn't scream. I was a prisoner to my own body. Then all of a sudden, the hair on the back of my neck stood up. In my ear, clear as day, I heard heavy breathing. It didn't sound human. My eyes widened, and then I felt the pressure lift off of me. I could move again. I ran so fast down the small hallway into my mother's bed. That whole night, I kept hearing someone walking back and forth in the hallway, but I refused to look through the doorway. When I tell you that I didn't sleep well that night, I mean I didn't sleep that week. The next morning, I walked into the hallway and just so happened to look up. The door to the attic was open. I asked Mom if she was up in the attic, and she said that there was no reason that it should have been open. My stomach felt like it was in my throat. I knew what was ever in that attic was in my bedroom the night before, just watching me. I'm thankful that I got up out of bed when I did, because if I didn't, I don't want to think what would have happened. I'm 22 now, and I still can remember that night as if it were yesterday, and I still can't sleep with the lights off. So to whoever or whatever grabbed my shoulders that night, stay away from me. I was 11 at the time and living in a nice suburban area. We had recently moved into this house that my parents had built, and it was our first home, versus renting a house in a sketchy area. It was a very nice neighborhood. The whole family made friends quickly with a lot of the neighbors, but especially the one 3 doors down. They had a daughter my age, and I'm a male by the way, and a daughter 5 years younger, which was the same age as my sister. Our parents got along well, and we began hanging out quite a bit, for barbecues at their house or parties at ours. Friendships were formed quickly, and it seemed to be very strong. After a year or so, I started realizing things weren't what they seemed. I remember seeing police cars at their house a few times in the evenings, and when I would ask my parents what was going on, it was always nothing, just checking in on them type of answers. I was no genius, but at 11, that didn't add up. Why did the cops just come and check up on us? One day, I'm at their house playing and hanging out, and the daughter goes across the street to get another mutual friend, which left myself and the father alone in the house. This was really no big deal as it had happened before, but then he approached me and just seemed off. I still don't know what made me feel this way, but I was very uncomfortable and started thinking about leaving. About 5 minutes later, he tells me that he has something cool to show me. I don't remember what it was, but I think it was something about baseball cards, which I was very fond of. I excitedly started following him. He pulled the attic ladder down and asked me to follow him, which I did without hesitation at first. And then something happened and I still can't process what it was. He was ahead of me on the ladder, and when he looked back to help me into the attic, there was something off. Something about his eyes, his face, his grin. It wasn't right. It looked evil. I can still see it as clear as day and can't recognize exactly what it was that set my alarms off. Whatever it was plenty, because I jumped off the ladder and ran out of the door. I sprinted all the way home, and I was choking back tears when I busted through my front door. Mom was there when I came through and could see that I was obviously out of sorts, and immediately started calming me down. As I came to my senses, I explained what happened. My mom was concerned with how scared I was, but mostly brushed it off to me being scared, young, and silly. I kid you not. That same exact night, I was awoken up at around 3 a.m. It was my mom sitting on my bed, and as I awoke, she held me like a baby. I remember how she smelled and how tightly she held me, and I remember her tears hitting my cheek. Eventually, I saw out the window to the neighbor's house. It was surrounded by police and fire trucks. The neighbor's dad had killed himself and his daughter in the attic after his standoff with the police. There isn't a doubt in my mind, nor my mother's, that would have been me if I had made it into the attic. I still get chills thinking about it. Okay, so around 9 or 10 years ago, I was living with my mom, dad, and older sister in an oldish house in a very small village. Like, when I say small, I mean its only main feature was a small church and a few scattered houses, occupied mostly by very old people. At the time, it was the summer, so I wasn't at school or anything, and since we were far in the middle of nowhere, I spent most of that time at home, glued to one screen or another. The usual routine was I would wake up at around 10 or 11. By this point, Mom, Dad, and my sister had all left for work, so I had the house for myself. I would go downstairs and make some toast and watch some random stuff on TV for around an hour before heading back to my room to continue with whatever game I was grinding through that particular day. The usual habits of a 17-year-old guy cut off from the world by many, many fields. I should give a quick rundown of our house. It was an older cottage with 2 rooms upstairs, mine and my sister's, and everything else downstairs. As you walk up the stairs, you got to a very small landing and could go either left to my room or immediately right to my sister's. Basically, the way that this was laid out was that I could sit in my room with the door open, and my sister's room is directly opposite. I should also mention that these ceilings in both our bedrooms were slanted. We were basically in a large attic where the roof slanted down. Because of where the slant met the wall, we had a crawl space that ran the length of the house on either side of the rooms, both with a small door to access them. They were mostly used for storing normal attic stuff, like Christmas decorations and old, forgotten toys. The doors to these were thin little things, about 4 feet tall with a small handle on the outside. This is important because turning these tiny doorknobs opened them, but only from the outside. If the door was pushed shut with you inside, there was no way back out. I discovered this myself on more than one occasion. The door on my side ran along my room, and along one wall in my sister's room, and hers ran along the other side along my room. This space was not very big. You had to crouch to stand in it, and most of the time that you were in there, you were crawling on hands and knees. This is all important later, I promise. Anyway, this one morning, I'm awoken to a familiar noise. Some sort of a small creature rustling around in the crawl space on my sister's side. I could hear this because my bed was against the wall that ran along it. Not an unusual sound. Living in the countryside, we had mice almost constantly, and pretty much had the run of these storage spaces, no matter how many traps were put down. I thought nothing of it and got up and went off to begin my morning ritual of toast and television. The first odd thing I noticed was while watching TV, I could hear movement upstairs. My sister's room was directly above the living room, so I assumed she had just not gone to work that day for whatever reason, and continued eating. Around an hour or so later, I went back upstairs and I booted up my PC. And as I was waiting, I turned around to my open door and faced my sister's closed one and realized that it was late in the day and she had not yet left her room. An odd thing since she normally parked up on the sofa in the living room on her days off and didn't move until our parents returned. We're not the most active family. I started to think that maybe she was at work, and I had imagined the noise from upstairs. But as I mused this, I noticed the crack of light at the bottom of her door, as a shadow passed by it. Okay, so there's definitely someone in there, so it must be her, right? I once again pushed it from my mind and went back to my PC. More time passed and the thought came back to me. Why would she be at home but not leave? She only has a small television in her room and no books, so what had she been doing in there all day? I glanced back around and again saw a shadow under the door. She was still moving around in there, so what was up? I finally decided to go knock on her door. I knocked a few times and said her name. No answer. Weird, maybe she had headphones on or something. I knocked a bit harder again and said her name again, but louder. No answer. Alright, I thought, screw this. I'm just going to go in, so I cracked the door open and peered around. I found an empty room. No one inside at all. Feeling slightly confused, but better that it was just my imagination, I stepped in properly and looked around and saw something that made me full-on panic. Near the bottom of her little door leading to the crawl space, there was a small hole that the mice had made to get in and out at the bottom. Really small, but just big enough to fit half of your hand through. There, coming through that hole, were 4 fingers, holding the door shut from the inside. At first I thought, no, it can't be fingers, don't be stupid, until I watched them slowly creep back through the hole into the crawl space. I lost my crap, very quietly though I might add. I backed out of the room, shutting the door behind me, and ran to my room. Being the stupid teenager I was, I grabbed what might be the most imposing weapon that I could find. A fake Winchester rifle cap gun I got from Disneyland a few years back. I figured that if whoever was hiding in that bedroom didn't believe it was a real firearm, I could at least hit them with it. I ran off downstairs to where my dogs were on the far side of the house and called my mom, who worked about only 5 minutes away from where we lived. She told me to stay put and that her and her manager were on their way. And this time, I had made a small upgrade from my fake plastic rifle to one of my dad's golf clubs. I felt much better with that. Finally, my mom and her boss, John, turned up and I tell them everything leading up to this point. They say okay and that we're all set off upstairs to investigate. Me rather unheroically bringing up the rear with my golf club. We get into my sister's room and I point to the door. I'll never know if my mom is just hard as nails or massively stupid, but while John and I watch, she marches over to the door, yanks it open, and sticks her head in. A moment passes while she looks left and right, and John and I are preparing to yank her back from the clutches of the psycho hobo murderer hiding in there before she shouts, "Chris, what the heck are you doing in there? Get out." A small amount of backstory. Chris was my sister's boyfriend. Unbeknownst to me, the night before, my dad had asked Chris to leave as he had stayed with us for around 5 days at this point. He said sure, that's cool, and as far as my mom and dad knew, he had headed home. What really happened was, instead of leaving, him and my sister had planned to make it seem like he had left, and then he could stay another night. He then would wake up before my mom shouted my sister up for work, like she did every morning, and he would hide in the crawl space and sleep there until everyone had left for the day. One small hitch in the plan was that they didn't think of was, you guessed it, me. They had forgotten that I was home, and conveniently sat directly opposite the only exit for most of the day, so he was pretty much trapped. When I knocked, he had hid himself behind the door and held it shut to prevent being locked in. Anyway, my mom swiftly told him to get the heck out and to not come back. Sadly, this was not the last time we saw the guy. As it turned out, he had stolen quite a bit of money from my sister's room while he had been hiding out. And then, because my sister makes terrible decisions, got her pregnant and proceeded to smash windows trying to get at her and the baby around a year later. For a while, we lived in the same city when I went to university, and he was spending time at the prison there for stabbing someone in a completely different town. He's definitely a super guy. Oh, and a small topper to all of this. As I had mentioned earlier, the only rooms upstairs are mine and my sister's bedrooms. He had been in there for close to 14 hours with no access to a toilet. But no worry for this guy, because he had a lot of empty bottles to piss in, which he kindly left behind for us to all clean up. And finally, around a year later, as Mom was getting the Christmas decorations out, which were at the far back of the storage space, she found a small bag filled with crap. I should mention, where she found it is exactly next to where my bed is on the other side of the wall. The rustling that woke me up that day, it was him, hiding his crap amongst our tinsel and tree. So, sister's baby daddy hid in our crawl space and used it as a private bathroom. That's not me, yeah. This is actually my friend's story, but I was almost a daily guest at her house, so I think I might be able to tell it like she would. She lived at her parents' house. We were around 18 years old, and they had just moved into a big house from a small apartment. They had a dog who was extremely well behaved, but sometimes in the middle of the night he would start growling and barking. One early morning, my friend's dad followed the dog to the kitchen where he saw a young man trying to get in through the window. The man got away before the police got there, but the growling and barking didn't stop. And sometimes we could all hear weird sounds, like someone was walking around on the roof of our house or something. Her dad would often have to look up into the attic and would see nothing, so he blamed those sounds on the weather. Changes in the heat or cold and humidity making the wood crack. This went on for a few years. A few nights a week, the dog would growl and they would hear what sounded like footsteps. I spent some nights there, and one time my friend woke me up just to make me listen. Years later, and a few years after my friend moved out from her parents' place, her dad was doing something in the attic when he found a tiny little door in the far corner. He had never noticed it before because this corner of the attic was really dark. He opened the tiny little door, and what he saw in the beam of his flashlight really freaked everyone out. He saw a dirty mattress, some burnt out candles, and candy wrappers. It's been years since she had told me about what her father saw, but I still get goosebumps thinking about it. Someone had actually been living in their attic. Maybe it was the guy who tried to climb in through the window. This happened a few years ago, and sometimes I still have nightmares where I didn't manage to get away. Let me start off by saying that I live in a pretty big city. Lots of bars and clubs, and I have experience with partying. I have been in blackout drunk situations, and this was not that. I no longer go out on my own. That night, I decided to go out with my friends bar hopping. I mainly knew only one of the girls that I hung out with on the regular. The other two were more acquaintances or strangers. I was very outgoing and I loved meeting people, so that was nothing new for me. We had a few drinks at a bar and continued on to the next one, having fun and great times. One of the girls I didn't know well pulled out the party stuff sometime during our second bar visit. I decided to skip it because I wasn't looking to get too effed up that night. My friend said yes, and she and the third girl went to the bathroom. The second girl, let's call her Barb, kept saying that I should go with the two others, but I declined and declined. She got a little aggressive, and I mean after the third time I declined. My friend came back just then, and Barb acted like nothing had just happened. We had some new guys join our group to flirt. I'm in a relationship, but my friend and Barb were not. By then, the second girl had left already. Barb and my friend were starting to get pretty messed up. I went to use the bathroom and to text my boyfriend that I was coming home soon, but I saw that my phone was dead. When I came back, the guys had bought us all shots. I was still pretty sober, so I declined the shot. Barb shoved the shot into my hand, and to avoid a scene, I took it. I started to tell my friend that I was heading home, but one look at her face and Barb and I saw that they were out of it. I was starting to feel pretty woozy myself. So I grabbed my things and their things and started shoving them to go. The guys that bought the shots were protesting, but I wasn't getting resistance from the girls. I hailed a cab. My phone was dead, so no Uber. And I remember putting the girls in the back and telling the driver that we were dropping off my friends at their houses and then going to my address. And then blacked out. I remember dropping off my friend, and then a blackout. And then I was alone with that driver. I was in the front seat and he was holding my hand. I looked around disoriented, took in the sight of him holding my hand while driving. Like my boyfriend would, I saw my wallet in the center cup holder. The meter was off and was telling me that he was taking me to a romantic place. I told him no, please take me home, that my boyfriend was waiting at home. He said something along the lines of, "Stop talking about him, I told you," which to me in hindsight indicates that I had told him already many times. He said he just wanted to pretend for a little and he held my hand tighter. I didn't want to trigger a violent reaction, so I left my hand there and started to reach for my wallet with my other hand. He saw, let go of my hand and took my wallet from the cup holder to his other side where I couldn't reach. I was still woozy and I blanked out again. When I came to my senses, we were parked near a very known romantic and touristy location in my city. Normally this place is packed, but not that night. It's pretty far from anything else too, and it's surrounded by woods. I started to cry and tell him to please take me home, that I wanted to see my boyfriend. I won't tell anyone, please. He looked at me and said, "I will take you home if you pretend you're my girlfriend for a little while." I sat there in shock. I wished my brain wasn't addled. I wished that I had never gone out. I wished that I could see my boyfriend for the 1000th time that night. I said okay and he smiled, put my wallet back in the cup holder. I took it slowly and put it under my leg. He took my hand and looked out the front window out into the little lake that he had brought me to. He started talking and I don't remember what he was saying. I was trying not to black out again. I waited for him to look at me and asked again, "Please take me home." He said if I let him give me a kiss, but I said no. He looked mad for a fraction of a second and squeezed the hand he was still holding. He leaned in fast and kissed me anyways. I kept my lips sealed tight against him, ready to fight, ready to bite and scratch and to not go down easy. He let go of my hands and backed away. He started the car and started our way back to civilization. I was crying as quietly as possible, trying not to be heard so he would forget I was there and want to touch me, to hold my hand. I waited until we were near enough people that I could bolt out of the car and find another way home. I think he saw me grabbing my wallet from under my leg and knew my intention to jump out at the next red light. But he snatched it again and said that he would drive me. I just nodded, but by then, I didn't care about the wallet, my phone, or anything else. I led jumping out. No matter what, I was going to get home. I didn't know what time it was by then, but I do know there was almost no cars driving in my usually busy city. No buses, no people. I didn't care anymore. He stopped at red light. I unlocked the door and I yanked it open and ran. I didn't look back, but I heard a car peel out of the intersection. He was running too. My phone was still dead, no wallet, so no money, and I was really far from my house. I was still drowsy and crying. I had no idea of the time and I started walking home. I heard a car pull up near me and started running out of instinct. I heard a woman's voice yell out, "Are you okay?" I stopped and swirled around, and the most beautiful person I have ever seen in this world was walking towards me slowly, hands out in front of her so as not to scare me. I started crying even harder, even more incoherent than I had ever been in my life. She hugged me so hard and asked for my boyfriend's number. She called him and he answered straight away. She started telling him where I was and that I was okay, and that she was taking me home. I cried the whole way back, trying to explain what happened, but still woozy, still freaking out. It was hard, so we drove in relative silence. When we got home, my boyfriend was waiting outside, losing his mind. My savior gave me a phone number to call her when I felt better and drove off. It was 5 a.m. I left the bar at 10 p.m. and that's all I can remember. A week later, my wallet showed up in my mailbox. When I was 16, some friends and I went to an outdoor concert festival type thing. We parked at the mall and took a shuttle to the venue. For perspective, the mall is a 20-minute drive from our homes and the venue is another 20 minutes away in a different direction. During the concert, I ended up losing my friends in the crowd. I didn't care much as I wanted to get to the front, and I could just call them after the concert had ended. Well, of course, I lose my phone somewhere in these sea of people, and don't even notice until the last show wraps up. I search the ground as the people dissipate with no luck. Reluctantly, I just hop on the bus heading back to the mall, hoping to meet them at the car. The car is gone and I start to freak out a little bit. It's 10 p.m. when I head to the bus station to see when the next bus to my city is coming. Just my luck, it happens to be Memorial Day, so no buses until 10 a.m. I borrow a stranger's phone and call the two numbers that I know, my mom and brother. My mom doesn't answer, but my brother does. He basically gives me the sex to suck talk and hangs up. So I'm alone, scared, and a little drunk in a city that I don't know. I try walking, but quickly give up when I realize that I'm basically walking down a random highway toward who knows where. Back at the station, I'm just staring at the map when a stranger creeps up behind me. He asks me where I'm headed and I tell him the truth. He conveniently is going to the same city and asks if I would like to split a cab. Realizing this is my only option, as I didn't have enough of my own, we get in the car. It turns out that he had even less than I did. We barely have enough to get to the heart of the city, which is a 10-minute drive from my house, but at least I know my way home from there. During the drive, this guy gets progressively more creepy. He's aware that I'm 16 and he's 25, but he scoots closer every minute, touching me, insisting that I come back with him to his place, and even writes his phone number on my bare leg. As we get there, I realize the situation that I'm in. We were about to get out into this quiet area at 2 a.m., and the cabbie is going to drive off, leaving no one here to hear me scream. The second that he gets out, I turn to the driver and beg him to take me a few streets further, so I can at least put some distance from him and me. The cab driver hadn't said a word the whole way, but he definitely heard everything. He asked me for my address and he drives me all the way home. The creeper watches as the cab drives off, with me still inside. When we got to my home, I offered to wake my mom up to pay him, but he declined, saying that he's just glad that I'm safe. I broke in through the kitchen window, got to bed, and cried my tears of relief for who knows how long. This happened to me when I was a kid, 10 to be exact. I grew up in a military family and lived in the Middle East for a significant portion of my life. Because of this, we traveled frequently to different countries because of the low cost and proximity. On this particular vacation, we flew into Cairo, Egypt, for a long weekend, and we only lived like 2 to 3 hours away. It was late at night and we were staying at the Marriott Hotel, which had a taxi shuttle service that was supposed to pick us up. For some reason, our driver never showed, so we were forced to take a regular cab to take us there, which took forever to find that late at night. We finally found one that was offering us a pretty good deal. They don't run by meters, instead they just give a flat rate that they choose, and headed towards the hotel. Out of nowhere, another taxi basically T-bones us in the middle of the road, causing us to stop. There aren't really defined roads in a lot of Arab places, so it isn't really that surprising that we got hit. In Arab nature, the two drivers get out of the cars, each yelling that it was the other's fault, and looking like they were going to throw hands. Eventually, they got back into their respective taxis and parted ways. My family and I were completely taken aback. We had been in Egypt less than 2 hours and have already had quite the adventure. We finally got to the hotel, exhausted as it must have been at 3 a.m. by this point. Our driver helped us get all of our bags out and get settled, and told us that he felt so bad about the car accident that he offered to pick us up the next morning and take us to the Great Pyramids, which was on our agenda for a super cheap rate. My parents agreed and decided on a time for him to come, though I can't remember when. Flash forward to the next morning. Everyone is ready for the day, excited to see how crazy it was going to be. Our driver was outside waiting for us, leaning against the car like someone in an old movie would, right when he said he would be there. I'm a blonde-haired, blue-eyed girl that had a deep tan at the time, and being in Egypt, that was a rare sight. When the driver saw me in the daylight, he gave me the creepiest, most unsettling look that sent chills down my spine, even as a 10-year-old. I knew something wasn't right with him. Nonetheless, we got in his taxi and headed towards the pyramids. He continued to try and talk to me and joke around with me the whole ride, something I found to be extremely creepy and bold since both my parents were in the cab. We get super close and there is an entrance that people can go through and walk the long distance to the pyramids, and there is an entrance that taxis can go through. You have to pay to see them. It's strange but true. Our driver keeps making jokes about my blonde hair and blue eyes and bringing up that he could get me into the pyramids for free, so my parents wouldn't have to pay the extra ticket price. We laughed it off and my parents paid him and said thank you and began to exit the taxi. I don't remember how it happened, but at some point after I got out of the car, he did too, and he directed me towards his trunk. I was confused and thought that we had forgotten something, so I stayed behind as my parents walked towards the gate to get whatever I thought we had left. The driver pops the trunk, but there wasn't anything in it. He grabbed my arm and put a hand on my back, trying to push me into the trunk, and said, "I'm getting you in for free," over and over again as I resisted. Naturally, I freaked out and screamed out to my mom and dad at the top of my lungs, terrified. When they heard me and noticed that I wasn't behind them, they started sprinting back to the car. When the driver heard me scream, he immediately let go of me, closed the trunk, and drove away just as my parents started to run to me. I was crying my eyes out, terrified out of my mind knowing that a taxi driver tried to put me in his trunk, and drove away the second that I screamed for help. It's scary to think what could have happened to me had he been stronger and more prepared, or faster. He is the reason that I am still terrified of taxis, Ubers, Lyfts, and any car service of that nature. This happened quite a while ago. My lifestyle at the time was very high risk. This story means a lot to me as it restored my much-needed faith in humanity. To explain why this incident meant so much to me, I need to provide a bit of backstory. I live in a really sketchy part of town. The particular building I lived in was a refurbished loft type with a very ugly history. You could still see the damage in the concrete walls from all the gunfire that it had taken at one point. Talking the pizza guy into delivering was always fun. No sir, it's not still a crime scene. Yes, real people live here. There was a local gas station within walking distance. Your typical shady place populated by shady people doing shady things. I had and still have a tendency to be somewhat chatty and polite when spoken to by strangers, especially if I frequent that store and see them often. I wound up making friends with a man named Houston, who had a talent for obtaining recreational plant life. We would hang out and philosophize about life and the like. I just felt like he had a good soul. I was coming home from a bar that I frequented one night. It was a Friday and that area was a popular night spot, so at closing time cabs would line up. I was quite drunk but sober enough to know better than to drive. The cab driver was talkative and I was not. I just wanted to go home and watch the world spin. Almost immediately out of his mouth came some of the most lecherous and disgusting things I'd ever heard. He would arc his neck around while driving, lick his lips and say just horrible things. And the worst part was not only did he have me in a moving vehicle, but he knew where I lived. I had no phone and just enough money for the ride home, and I was terrified. "You want me to pull in so I can lick you?" "No thank you, I'd like to go home and vomit." Being the smartass that I was, I said that. It was as if I hadn't said anything at all to the man though. He kept turning around and reaching out to grab me as I swerved out of his reach. "Hey, show me him, I want to see him." The situation escalated when he started to drive around aimlessly, pulling into dark complexes and slowing down to try and grab me. I had to do something, so I did something that I don't think he was expecting. I flirted with him. I leaned over the front seat and gave him my best drunk and seductive face and said, "Do you want to party?" He stopped, looking blank for a moment before a huge grin widening across his face. "Oh yeah, where do you want to party? You want to party here?" He started to adjust himself and I wanted to rip that frickin' thing off. "No, not here, let's get some beer and go to my place." He agreed and I led him to my local gas station. "Pull in here and I'll go get some. What do you like?" I said sweetly. He said he didn't care and as soon as he parked I grabbed my bag and got out. He sat there waiting. My voice must have had an obvious tone of panic as I asked the lady behind the bulletproof glass, "Is Houston here?" She looked concerned and shouted for him. He came out from the back. I was so relieved and in one hysterical breath, I told him everything. The expression on his face darkened, and he said to me very curtly, "You stay here." I walked to the window as he exited the store. He took 3 steps outside, whistled, and with arms out on either side, he made a "come here" motion. Out of the darkness came 20 really scary guys from both sides. He pointed to the cab and said something that I didn't quite make out. Whatever it was, they swarmed the cab and they tried to flip it over. That cab burned rubber peeling out of the parking lot. The men then looked back at the store window and Houston laughed, nodded, and they disappeared back into the darkness. It was surreal. My jaw was on the floor and Houston came back inside with a grin. I don't think he'll be back. I couldn't thank him enough. He was my hero at that point, hands down. It had started to rain, so he and his friend walked me home under a giant umbrella. There are no words to describe the restoration of my faith in humanity that night. Cliché as it sounds, there really is light in the darkest of places, and kindness in the most unexpected of places.